Minister, I have met literally hundreds of parents of children with disabilities over the last number of months, primarily in the area of healthcare and accessing speech and language therapy support, occupational therapy, child psychology, physiotherapy, a whole range of supports that children with disabilities need and they can't get because we don't have adequate resourcing of Children's Disability Network teams. And part of that is also the lack of supports in schools as well. So there is obviously a clear link between the assessments of need that the HSE should be providing, and in fact we're not providing, and we're found by the High Court to be in breach of the law with those services on the one hand, but also education needs, because an assessment of need was in theory to look at the health but also the education needs of a child. Minister, children with special needs are being failed, and again we saw a survey a number of weeks ago published by the National Principals Forum, which again outlined in very stark terms the nature of that failure. Children with additional needs are receiving on average 21% fewer hours of specialised learning support now than they would have received 15 years ago. I have to say that's a damning indictment on successive governments of which your party was part of, that the situation now for children with disabilities in schools is worse than it was 15 years ago. The vast majority of primary schools have more pupils with additional needs than they had 4 years ago. Again, they are facts, and yet the most recent allocation of SNA positions were frozen for the third year in a row. 8 in 10 principals want a full-scale review and a new child-centred system for allocation of special needs resources and places in schools, so that every child with additional needs can receive the support that they need in the most appropriate setting. And for the vast majority of children with special needs, that should be in a mainstream school. We also saw, as I said, Minister, a High Court case recently that found that the HSE were in breach of the law. They were essentially breaking the law when it came to assessments of need. And one of the issues that the judge in that case referred to was the lack of cooperation between the HSE and the NCSE when it comes to allocation of resources. And they blamed the government for not commencing the Epson Act, which again has been promised by successive governments but which hasn't happened. 1 in 4 Children's Disability Network posts are vacant. That's a phenomenal figure. We're being told that 700 posts, mainly therapist posts, which results in about 400,000 hours of therapy that children with special needs should be getting but cannot get because the post can't be filled. And yet we hear excuse after excuse from the government as to why these issues cannot be resolved, and yet, or how difficult it is to recruit staff, but yet we don't see any plan being put in place by government to increase training places for all of these positions so that we can recruit more. These children have constitutional and legal rights, Minister, to these services. At least 267 children will not have appropriate places this September, according to As I Am. And each and every one of those children who won't have a place this year because of government failure are children who are being badly let down. And they're being badly let down in so many different areas. They are not getting the assessments of need that they deserve. They're not getting the supports in terms of therapy supports that they need and deserve. And they're not getting access to school places. So when we meet parents of children with disabilities, and Deputy Tully organised a briefing in the AV room a number of weeks ago, and it was really well attended, and there was 5 parents of children with special needs, mainly with autism, and they all told the stories of their children, what their children were like, how much they loved them, how brilliant the children were, but also how challenging it was because of the disability that the child had. And it was heartbreaking to hear how almost every single one of those parents felt let down by the system, both in terms of access to healthcare supports, access to therapy supports, but also a failure to provide proper school supports and proper school placements. That's unacceptable. So what we're calling for, Minister, is very clear. We first of all want you to publish the real number of children who are in need of places. We want you to expedite legislation to ensure adequate provision in schools, and we want to ensure that every single child has an appropriate place in September when the schools recommence. And that's your job, Minister, to deliver that. Gurmagh.